we can bind data with the controller. Similarly, we can validate data which we enter in the forms. Whenever you enter data in the form, that can be submitted to server, as we know. So without form, if you try to submit data to server, it cannot be sent. Normally using forms, we are going to send data to server. So whenever we use forms, as far as HTML is concerned, we have different types of input elements. So we know that it is a radio button, it's a checkbox, it's a select, similarly it's going to be text. So we have different types of controls on the HTML. We can categorize them as like select elements, input elements, button elements, and text area related. So these are going to be various elements we use in the HTML. Input means directly you can enter input into them. Using select statement, you can be selecting from the available options. So by clicking on the buttons, button element may be checkbox also can be treated as button, even radio button also can be a button. When you click on the button, certain action can be performed there. Or you can go with options, whether you want to select something or whether you want to select multiple things. In such cases, you can use checkboxes. Of the available number of options, if you have to go for one, in such cases, you use actually radio buttons. Okay, so you can use buttons that way. Text area, when you have lot of data, normal input text if you take, you can have only one line of data. But when you need to enter multiple lines of data, in such cases, text area is the ideal one. So with the help of these controls, we actually send data to server. Through the controller, we can send data, but before you send to server, you need to validate. Sometimes you have to validate them. Okay, so for that purpose, here we can use AngularJS forms. So we know that data can be bounded using ng model. We have ng bind, and one more thing is ng model. So two-way data binding you can do with the help of the ng model. Okay, so it is going to be binding data two-way. Whatever data is available with the controller, you can take and you can put into the input element, or whatever data you enter in the input element, you can be updating in the controller. So this way, normally we use it. Okay, so whenever we work with actually forms, as I told you, you can use different types of elements on that. Text is one element, text box is one element, text area is another element, radio button, checkbox, select. All these are going to be different ways of inputting data. You can enter data in number of different ways. Okay, so depending on the requirement, we are going to enter in that way. So now, whenever you talk about actually forms, with the help of forms, you can be sending data to controller. So here we can use one submit, other one is going to be reset. So with the help of reset method, what happens? Whatever data you have in the text area or all the things are going to be reset total. They are going to be reset. So now using Angular forms, you can achieve the required things. So in the AngularJS, you have form validation. So it is going to offer client-side form validation. Validation can be done in the server or it can be done in the client. Client validation is often better because we need not send all the data to server. So in the client side itself, if you can validate, you actually reduce the burdening of site. That means if you have to validate in the server, you need to submit to server. In the server, if the data is invalid, in that case, again, if you come to HTML page, appropriate messages you need to display. But with the help of the form side validation or client side validation, you can avoid that burden there. So without sending data to server, in the client side itself, you can actually perform the validation. Okay, so as far as form validation is concerned, we can have different types of validations. Like you can use attribute required. Okay, other thing is type email. All these are nothing but HTML5 validations. In the HTML5, you have like required. That means you need to enter compulsory data into that. Similarly, you can enter actually only for email also you can give. Type when you give email, only email data you can enter. So whenever you take any form, okay, form state and input state, two things we need to consider in that. So AngularJS actually, as you enter data, it's going to update state of the form as well as the input field. It's going to continuously update the state. Okay, so whenever you look at input fields, they have certain states. First state is called as actually $untouched. That means what, so far we haven't come into that field, we haven't touched it. That's called as $untouched. It's one of the states. $touched is nothing but when you focus on that, it's going to be $touched. So you have one more state called as $pristine. So pristine meaning is nothing but here the field hasn't been modified. So in such cases you have $pristine. $dirty meaning is field when it's getting modified, you have a value called as $dirty. Similarly, you have $invalid. So whenever the content in the field is not valid, it's called as $invalid. And one more thing, whenever you have valid content in that, it's going to be $valid. So like this, we have actually the states for the given input. For the input, you have certain states. As I told, $valid, that means what? The content in the field is valid. $invalid, whatever content in the field you have is invalid. Dirty means what? Already there is some data in that you have modified. In such cases, it's called as $dirty. Then we have one more thing called as $pristine. So in the case of $pristine, the field so far hasn't been modified. Similarly, you have here $touched and $untouched. Okay, so these are basically called as states. They can contain a value true or false. So all these are nothing but, we can say them as properties. The states are nothing but here properties of the input fields. So either they can be true or they can be false. Either can be true or they can be false. These are called as normally the state of the field, the state of the input field. So here $touched, $pristine, $dirty, $invalid, $valid, then $untouched, all these are called as actually the state of the input. Whenever you have a form, you might have done something with the input field. You might have focused but you did not enter anything. Similarly, already you have some data in that, you might have modified that. So when you modify, it's nothing but actually dirty. Okay, whenever you have any data on the input field, just you focus on that, but you haven't done anything. So in such cases, state is going to be pristine. So like that, we have different state for the given input field. So these fields are going to be $untouched, $pristine, $dirty, $invalid, $valid, and $touched. So these are going to be various states as far as form is concerned, as far as input is concerned. In the same manner, for the form also we have state. So here you can have 5 different states as far as form is concerned. First thing, it is $valid. Whenever the content of the form is valid, it's nothing but actually a valid content. So it is valid. That means $valid is going to be true. Whenever content of the form is not valid, in such cases that's going to be $invalid. So sometimes you get actually $submitted. Whenever you submit form data, it's going to be having true value. You may be having sometimes $dirty. So $dirty meaning is what? One of the fields on the form have been modified. So $pristine is going to be when you don't modify any field. In such cases, it's going to be $pristine. So forms as well as input fields, they have certain input states. Okay, so we can actually use these states to show messages to the user. To the user, you can show messages depending on the requirement. With the help of that, you can be validating you can validate actually input elements. You can validate form and appropriate messages you can show. Even error messages also you can be showing when it is required. Okay, so here you can actually use all these states. For form you have different states, and similarly for the input fields you have different states. So here, whenever something is invalid, even you can try with the help of the CSS classes. You can show with CSS classes. Okay, so here whenever you are not touching any field, you can use ng-untouched. Whenever touching, you can use ng-touched. All these are actually predefined classes. You can use them. We can use actually these predefined classes. We can be using them. So To perform form validation, we can do it. To perform form validation, we can use this. So let us try to do here some form validation. We can perform some validation here in this. Let us try to do some form validation now in this. Okay, now let me create here some form validation screen. Srinivas, are you following this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let me create here a new page. This is